But you mentioned the one pattern that I noticed as well. This is the thing, when you talk to enough experiences, you start to see these patterns, and that's why this book that was written by the Free Foundation has all the data in it. It's so important. You see all these patterns, and they picked up all these patterns. And the other one is, it's not in that book, but I noticed with, and I think I mentioned this before, where I'll have an experiencer and they'll say, I was on the ship and there was, you know, how many aliens, there was 5 aliens or whatever, and I say, so who is the one you're dealing with? What's his name? And then they'll say Ramadier, or they'll say Elby. They all have that, they know exactly who it is, and this is the whole deal. So the question is that actually an alien, or is this all a play of your spirit guide pretending to be an alien to come in? And this is the thing, because this is, we're in the space generation, so they're going to portray themselves as you know, space people rather than leprechauns of the last century, or angels of the Bible and stuff like that. That they represent themselves in a way that you're going to understand. And that's what Chris Peters, Barbara Streisand's stepson, told me. When they come in, they told him that we go into your head and we see what's in your head, and whatever's in your head, that's what we use to build your lesson. So they're taking what we're doing now and things that we can understand. You can't put stuff from the future or stuff like that, that they're sort of indirectly telling us what the lessons are. And it's just sort of fascinating, and I don't know how long it'll take for the UFO community to catch up on the fact that there's these very definite patterns that we're being taught something, because everybody's still into this nuts and bolts thing, like, does the government know, you know, if we get this technology, what can we do with it, and how can we make money with it, and how to make weapons and stuff like that. And it may have nothing to do with that at all. It's a total different thing, that they're here for a reason, because, you know, it's the idea that, you know, we detonate the atomic bomb and suddenly they appear in absolute mass all over the place. And that's this concept of oneness, is that if you ring the bell, the whole bell rings. And this is this whole concept that, and even from the 1950s, the alien that was talking to the Canadian government and to Francis Swan was talking about this idea that whatever you do, you think it just affects you. That if you detonate an atomic bomb, that it just affects this little area. And then Wilbur Smith would say, when you detonate an atomic bomb, you get it going up. You also get it going down through the Earth. And he would talk about how they had, we called reduced binding, areas of reduced binding. He went to the Canadian government and he said there was these reduced bindings, that planes would fly through these sort of areas of reduced binding that were created by nuclear weapons, and the planes would crash. And he said the government would totally ignore them. But that's the whole idea, is we don't realize, and that's what the idea they give us about the nuclear weapons, is that fact that the entire universe is affected, that it's all connected, and we have this idea of separation. Don't tell me what to do, this doesn't affect you, this is my country, I can do whatever I want, I can test or whatever. And you don't realize that there's this connection that you get in everything, like the UFOs, the messages from the aliens, in DMT, and all the psychedelics, in meditation. You always come back to this whole thing, that we've got it all backwards. We think there's this separation of nouns, and it's all one thing. It's alive. It's this sort of verb thing. And because the universe is eternal and we live forever, according to some of the theories, I mean, it doesn't really matter. And we want everything yesterday. So we've got to figure this thing out, and there's this big race to go on, and in the end, they really don't care how long it takes. And as I maintain, I think they may have done it on 1,000 different planets. So when I make the joke about, you know, where are the wooden ships from 1895, they're on another planet that's like 150 years behind us, and then they're going to send in the green fireballs and the Foo Fighters and the Adamski crafts and bring in the guys with the suits, and they go through. They may have done it thousands of different times on different planets, and they know exactly what they're doing, how to do it. And it's this non-intervention thing, which you'll hear about all the time, that you can't interfere. So the way they'll do it, and you hear this through experiences as well, is they'll say, even with the DMT stuff, they'll say, I think I know these people. I think I'm related to them. So the idea is you can't interfere. You can't come in and give the lecture, but you can get someone to volunteer to be born into that society, and then the message comes through them. So it's this way to get past this because a lot of people will claim that they are part of a plan, and some of them are very specific. There's one girl in Scotland who says absolutely, and she said, I'm up from another planet, and I'm here, and I do all this kind of stuff, and she has flown the craft, and she's got the writing, and it's something that we're gradually putting together. but still you've got to get the one part of the UFO community into this idea, because they're into this other. They're not really interested in the message, the spiritual message, whatever. In fact, they'll turn it off as soon as you mention anything like that. Then you're not, or it's like Einstein used when it happened with quantum physics, when you had the non-locality thing, spooky action at a distance, and then Niels Bohr started to talk about this idea about everything being one, and Einstein got upset and had the argument and said, you're not going to drag mysticism into physics. And it's like, this is your plan to do, and then a lot of scientists will back off as soon as you use that word spiritual or consciousness or whatever. It's like, no, we're not going there. We can't do that.
It is nice to see that Gary Nolan is definitely, he's like, you can't have it without the woo.
Yeah.
And that's true.
Yeah, and that's where the thing is he part of a plan? Did he agree to come in here and do this? Yeah. Because you get all these guys, and people always forget how many of these guys are experiencers. He's an experiencer. Eric Davis is an experiencer. Hal Puthoff probably is, because his son had a major, after the Phoenix Lights. You have Jim Semivan's an experiencer. You have, you look at them all, and they all basically are guys who have had an experience, and that's how they motivate you. Once you've had the experience, then you want to make a move and do something. You want to, and that's what I say about Jim Semivan. He's very upset about, still after 30 years, he's very upset that they took him and they didn't ask for permission. And I would think to myself, well, you're a CIA agent. He talks, one time he talks about going into another country and stealing his stuff, and he said it was absolutely fantastic. It was a great time. And it's like, did you ask permission before you stole the stuff? It's like, we have our rules, and yet it's this idea that he's still upset about it. But the fact of the matter is, he's the guy behind the New York Times article. He's the guy that went to the three-letter agency. He said, "You guys can't get this out. We're going to get it out. We're not going to release classified material, but we're going to get this stuff out." And they said, "Yeah, okay, go ahead and keep us informed." And then, but he would never have done that if he hadn't had the experience. And that's how it works. It motivates these people one drop at a time, and people are running around. And now you see there's piles of them, and piles of people are channeling, piles of people are talking about their experiences and stuff like that. And you can even get where yesterday we met those two girls. And before you wouldn't bring it up, but then I bring it up now. Oh, we're doing this UFO thing. Yeah, really? And suddenly there's two of them and they're phoning people, and it's like a different sort of zeitgeist now, where it's come up. And it's maybe at a point where you can start talking about consciousness and stuff like that. You can do documentaries, which if you follow Jill Bolte Taylor, I don't know if you know the story of Jill Bolte Taylor. Hers is an important consciousness story. I quote her a lot of times in my books. So Jill Bolte Taylor was a neuroanatomist at Harvard working on brains. Her brother was schizophrenic, so she was studying brains to try to figure out why her brother was different than her. And she's 38, I think, when it happened, and it's the most watched TED Talk, I think, of all times. And she's because she's a neuroanatomist, so she's a brain person. And she gets up in the morning, she has this excruciating headache behind her eyes, and she's, what's going on? And then she gets on her glider and she goes into the shower, and the noise of the shower, and just going crazy. And then she's on the glider and her hands start looking like claws, and she's going, what is going on here? And then suddenly her left arm or right arm goes numb, and she goes, oh, I'm having a stroke. I'm having a stroke. And then she's because her left brain shuts down. So she's in her right brain, and then this is this whole thing I say is very important that people forget. It's this right brain, left brain. They say, no, all the brains work together. I said, no. Why do you have two sides of a brain? This is very important to understand these things. So what happens is the left brain shuts down, which is the rational, analytical ego. She said it was like taking a remote control and turning off the sound. And she said suddenly she was one with the universe, and she's out there. And then what's happening is she's got the hemorrhage in her left brain, and the blood is flooding the left brain and shutting down all the neurons, and the signal is lost. So it's not like the brain is doing it, and the signal is lost, and she's picking up this oneness of the universe, and the left brain is shut down, and then she suddenly goes back into the left brain, and the left brain's going, you gotta do something. This is serious. Better do something. So I gotta do something. And suddenly, oh, she's back into the middle of the universe. And she's talking about being one with the universe and stuff like that. And it was bliss, and she didn't care. And then left brain comes back online. You gotta do something. And then she's trying to make a phone call. She's trying to phone the lab to tell them that she needs help, but she can't read. She can't. She looks at all the numbers, and then she finally gets the number. She's going one number at a time to try to get the number to get it, because she can't really compare the number on the card to. In fact, I think she spent 45 minutes looking through business cards trying to find the business card that was her card, and so then she said, even you realize like what the left brain does and what the right brain does, and she talks about, she finally gets them on the line, and she says, I talk to him, I go rah, 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 like a dog or something. She says, and she says, that sounds so weird. Why did you do that? And then she said, and then he went rah, 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 rah. And they raced her in, and she said for 8 weeks she was in bliss, and she said she was sitting there drooling, and she was at her mother's place, and everybody felt sorry for her, and she said she had to talk herself into coming back into the world, because she was in this absolute state of bliss in the right brain. So she does all these talks about the right brain and left brain and what they do, and just fascinating. And that's what you'll see in the UFO experience, is this idea that people get into this sort of a state where there's no time, there's no space, and whatever, and then you start to wonder, are you actually taking people through walls, or are you taking the essence? Because if you take a look at abductions, and I maintain this all the time, anybody ever see anybody being abducted? Nobody ever see. I remember one girl told me, she said she saw a UFO over this house. She believed somebody was being abducted. But other than the one case with Bud Hopkins talking about a woman being floated out of a 25th story of a building and the UFO was there, other than that, you don't get people seeing other people being abducted, and people will suddenly appear on the craft and stuff like that, or they go through walls. And when you go through walls, then you sort of, if you understand the whole out-of-body experience thing, then you realize that's maybe what's going on. Or I had the guy that ran MUFON, Peter Whitley, who ran MUFON Japan, and he talked about going out of body and just going to the craft immediately. And then Stephen Greer tells a story. He tells a story about some guy going out of body, and he's floating up, and he goes into the craft. He runs into this craft, and then the alien looks at him and says, "Watch where you're going." So, and that's 20 years ago he told that story, and then it really didn't mean anything. But now you sort of realize that this could be part of the whole deal, that it's not as physical as people think it is. And the whole world, if you start breaking it down, is not as physical. And that's where I say where we're making a mistake is we're making a bunch of false assumptions about from before. The world's flat, we've straightened that out. The sun goes around the earth, we straightened that out. One galaxy, we straightened that out. And as we go along, we realize, oh, this is wrong now, this is wrong now. And even you get stuff like download stuff that people still don't believe, and yet you hear people like Gary Nolan. So Gary Nolan, I don't know if you heard the story, so Gary Nolan, that's how he does it. And he said, I don't know how it works. He said, I don't know if there's little L's in my head or what's going on. He said, but I know how to make it work. And he says, I go through all the questions, I work through all the stuff, and then I take the questions, write down, and then I put the question I want answered, I put it beside the bed, and he said either the next morning or within the next couple of days the answer pops into my head. And this is Gary Nolan telling the story. So I went to him, I said, can I use this for a quote? Can you quote this for me? And then he described it a little bit different. He said he's like putting it on a board like the FBI. You have this incident, that incident, you got strings going between these incidents and stuff like that, and then it comes to him. And you see he's using that. And then if you go back, I wrote a lot of stuff on inventions. I wrote a book called Inspired, where I looked at inventions and where dreams come from, or dream songs and all this kind of stuff, and inspirations and stuff like that. And I went through 13 Nobel Prizes, and 2 of them were the same thing, where the guy worked on a problem. One was laser and one was the hologram. And they were on the South Winnipeg glide path into the airport, coming out. Heading from Minneapolis, probably. So I wrote this book called Inspired, where I looked at 13 Nobel Prizes. And the idea is Nobel Prizes are invented by really smart people. And it's like, no. And you start looking, it's like, no, not really. It's people who have these sort of insights, and they're working on it. So the hologram and the laser, both the same thing, where the guys are working on it, and they both were sitting on park benches. In fact, the one they made it into a statue in California. It's Towns was the guy's name, sitting on a park bench like this. And he was sitting there waiting for a restaurant to open. And he'd run through all the problems. That's how it works. You quiet the mind. So you work on the problem, you get it going, and go through all the different the different possibilities and stuff, and you can't figure it out, And then you go and you say, I'm going to take a break. You go and he's sitting outside a restaurant waiting for the restaurant to open in the morning. All of a sudden, boom, comes in his head. And I know how that feels. It's like, oh man, run, and write it down. And the other guy was sitting on a park bench and he was watching a tennis match, they were playing tennis. All of a sudden, button pops in his head. He goes running back to the lab. And that's this whole idea, is you run it through, and then you have to learn to quiet the mind. And if you can quiet the mind, then that signal, almost like Joe Bolte Taylor, it shuts down that left side of the brain. The neurons sort of shut down, or they're distracted doing something else, and it opens the signal, and you can pick up the signal, which means the signal is there for everybody. 40% of all UFO experiencers say at one point during the experience they knew the answer to everything in the universe. And I say to people, you don't think experiences are important? Do you think these people are lying? Do you think maybe if you should maybe try to talk to them? I mean, if at one point they knew the answer to everything in the universe, don't you think this might be important, that we could crack this thing and figure out how to get through it, hypnotize the person and go back to that period of time, and what did they tell you and stuff like that? And that's where I think we're sort of missing the boat. We're sort of into this material world where it's all about toys, and it's all about cell phones and stuff like that. And the spiritual message, we're different now. We're secular, and we can separate, government versus religion, and we're just going to stick with the facts. People say, stick with the facts, stick with the evidence. And basically what they're saying is, we just want the physical technology, and you're missing the boat. It's not physical technology when you really come down to it. But you do have, like you'd never have before, you have Gary Nolan there, and Eric Davis. Eric Davis had the experience where he was doing his PhD. And I say to people, do you really think this is accidental? He's doing his PhD, and then he gets his astrophysics PhD, and then he's having the party for his astrophysics thing there outside, and all of a sudden, boop, there's a UFO, and him and his wife watching this UFO, and it was like a dramatic sighting, and he's down the rabbit hole, and he's like one of the key guys now who's putting this thing together. And that's how they do it. They do this sort of thing. The UFO's not doing anything, it's just there. Like same with Bud Hopkins, he's driving along, and all of a sudden, boop, this thing's over him, and he goes and he gets sort of drawn into the thing, and he becomes one of the top researchers of all time. There's very few researchers who got into it, because they read a book or something like that. They have some sort of weird thing that they're open to the paranormal, or open to UFOs, or the UFO just appears there. And there's just piles of stories of the UFO is just there, it doesn't do anything, and then the guy ends up writing a book. Or I'll say to people, I say, hey, do you like when you wrote the book, do you think they wanted you to write the book? Oh, yeah, they wanted me. And do you think they helped you? Oh yeah, they helped me. It's like, and you start to know the questions that you ask, and so I ask completely different questions. People will get into the fear thing, are you afraid, and stuff like that, and I'm into all these weird questions. They have clothes on, was it breathing, was there any toilets on the craft and stuff like that, and you start going down this other route that's saying, what are we really dealing with here? And that's what it comes down to, is what are you really looking at here? Is it what it appears to be? Is the world flat? Does the sun go around the earth and stuff? And we're because we're so based on getting data, observing, getting data, duplicating data, make predictions. But as I said, with the sun going around the earth, you can do all those things and be wrong. Doesn't mean you're going to answer the question. The more questions you get, or the more evidence you get. Or I remember I was at university, first year university, there was a course on, it wasn't what course, it was called planetary science or earth science or something. It was just sort of a general course on geology and space and stuff like that. And it was taught by this astronomer guy. And I remember he said to us, he said, okay, prove to me the world is round. And for the whole hour we tried. And you look at it, it's very hard. You can say, okay, the astronauts saw it. Well, the astronauts said they saw UFOs. Is that true? And it's round. We got photographs. We got photographs of UFOs too. And all the evidence you can do. And he said it came down to some mathematical equation, but it's like, if you don't, that mathematical equation doesn't mean that either. You have to sort of assume, and the more you know about people going into space and stuff, the more you realize, oh, that was wrong, this is wrong, that's wrong, and the more evidence we bring in, we realize that stuff in the past was wrong, which is what Gary Nolan says and what I say. is the problem is you're making assumptions that this stuff is right. Everything's inside the bell curve, and it's the stuff outside the bell curve that's going to lead you down the road. It's there for a reason, and if you figure out why this thing is happening, this paranormal thing is happening, then you're going to understand something new in the world, and you're going to realize something that you had was wrong. And we're replacing old ideas all the time with these new things, and that's what they're doing. They're just sort of nudging us along and moving us, and it may be us. It may be us, the higher self, if it's all one. We're part of this process that we agreed to come in. People will talk about this, if you're familiar with, Dolores Cannon talks about the 3 waves, and this is very popular now. And now Susie Hansen said she discovered it, that she was the first to come up with it. And this idea that there's these waves of people that have come in and agreed to come in at this period of time and to do this and to raise consciousness. And so then it comes down to this thing where you complain about the world, and then I always remind people, you got to remember, whatever you're experiencing, you may have come in here at this time and this place in the middle of this mess for a purpose.
I think that's why we're here.
Yeah, yeah. So people will complain about it, but you got to realize maybe you chose to come at this time rather than a good time because you got something to offer. And that's because, and so the UFO thing flips the whole thing. Everything gets flipped all the time in terms of it's not this, exactly the opposite thing. And so we've had these discoveries, you know, even the thing where people don't realize, I mean, the idea of the solid atom, it wasn't until 1911 with the gold foil experiment that they discovered that the atom wasn't solid. And they used to believe it was, you know, solid, and it had little electrons embedded like a plum pie and stuff like this. And, you know, women didn't get to vote until 1920. And you start looking at all this stuff that we've, in the last century, and you realize, I mean, we've come a long way. But we sort of forget. We always think everything's happening today, happened in the past. And I say in the UFO community, it's a completely different world. There's absolutely nothing happens now, and that you have these patterns. So you have the Calvin relations starting in '67, and then they sort of fade out in the 1990s or whatever, and you get the odd one, but that sort of stops. And the ground traces start, and they burn in grass, and there's tripod marks. There hasn't been one of those for 25 years at least. It's just, it sort of goes, and there used to be windows in crafts. You used to have, you know, tell people it used to be angel hair. You don't even know what angel hair, if you're talking to a young audience, they have no idea what angel hair is. It used to be all the time, it was dropping this stuff hanging off the trees, and they would all get to analyze it, and they'd take it, and it would all sort of dissolve before they got it and stuff like that. And it was a completely different world. And that's, so you realize, because the impression you have is, if it's an outside thing like a tree, it's never going to change. There's that object, and then there's me, and this is changing. So it's not an object, it's a process. It's something that they're doing, because it definitely is changing all the time. And stuff that happens now, I mean, this thing with light language, remember the first time I saw a woman do light language? My friend showed it to me here, and I go, what is she doing? It's like this, yeah, it's almost like talking in tongues and stuff like that. And then I started to find more and more people, and then I had a Zoom conference with all these people came out. I had about 15 of them. It's, okay, you do yours. And she had light language, and they all claimed it was alien language, but they all sounded a little bit different, but it was the same sort of stuff. And I go like, there's no way this happened when I first started. And so you see this progression of things that they, okay, let's try this. And then it's almost like you're turning the pages of a book, and you're going to the next page, next page, next page, and they know how it's going to end, which was the message they gave me. So I wrote 5 disclosure books. Well, 3 have been done. 4th is finished. And in the 4th, you can get very frustrated in ufology, and I'm frustrated about, you know, it's never going to come out, and nobody's listening, and stuff like that. And that's when they gave me the message: don't worry, quit worrying. We know how to land the plane. And I go, whoa! It's like clear as day. We know how to land the plane. And I thought, that makes sense. You know, that's what they're doing. That's what Jim Semivan, when he was briefing, because the story was that Jim Semivan had his experience. And this was told to me by a very respected source, a guy that brought me in to help on the briefing of Trump. They wanted to brief Trump. He was a big fundraiser in Pennsylvania for Trump. And he told me this story. He said, when Jim Semivan had the experience, he went into the CIA, and he went to Ron Pandolfi, because Ron Pandolfi runs the Weird Desk. And he said to Ron, I had this weird experience last night. There's these beings in my room, and I need to know what's going on here. What the hell's going on here? And Ron says, you don't have a need to know. He said, what? I don't have a need to know? You kidding me? Hey, you bring your boss's boss in here, and we'll see who doesn't have a need to know. Because Jim Semivan was like the equivalent of a 2-star general in the CIA. So Ron brings in, I think it was Tenet, the CIA director, and then Tenet says to Semivan, according to the story I heard, said, leave it alone. it'll destroy your career. Just pretend it's a one-off. Pretend it only happened one time and never happen again. Just leave it alone, and it's not worth it. And then I was told that as soon as Semivan retired in 2008, Ron came in and said, okay, here's the briefing, and they gave him the briefing. And you hear this from Kit Green, the same thing. When you're in the government, you have a security clearance, but as soon as you retire, then they give you the security clearance, and you end up as a contractor. And that's what they gave him the real briefing as to what was actually going on. So then he started telling other people, yeah, this is real. Government's researching this stuff. And one of the people he talked to was John Alexander, who's written a book on UFOs and said, no, I was a colonel in the Army. If they had a program, we would know. We actually ran what they called the Advanced Physics Theoretical Working Group, where they brought in 20 people, high-level, special access people, and they sat down. The government knows what's going on. And they were trying to go together and say, can we get some money? Can we figure out what's going on, get the government to fund us and stuff like that? And they basically determined, yeah, it appears that somebody's doing something, but we don't know who's doing it or what's going on. So John said, based on that, all these 20 people, and I released the notes into the public with these meetings they had in 1985. He said, no, if there had been a program, we would have known about it. You don't understand how government works. There's so much money, and they're not going to put money into this. And he has all these things. He wrote a book that, no, there's no program. So then Jim Semivan said, well, yeah, there is a program. And he said, well, who's running it? He said, they are. And this is because John wanted to know who the government's running. He said, they're running the program. So that's why I say with these, whether it's experiencers, listening to experiencers, or whether you're listening to high-level people in the government, you listen very carefully, and from time to time they'll say something like that, which may not mean anything to anybody else. I'll go, wow. Or this Lakatsky ran the OSAP program, did this one interview, and that's when he said all UFO sightings are different. 200,000 sightings are all different. And I went, whoa. It's like, yeah, I picked up on, and then he said the thing that's backed up this thing about the craft being alive. He said, we've discovered. And you got to remember, he put this through security, so it's been approved by the government that he could put this out. He said, we've discovered that the technology is a combination of psychic and mental material, or physical and mental and psychic material. And I'm going, that's the craft. That's flying the craft. It's the same thing. You got this physical thing, but it's also got the psychic component. And so when you hear him say stuff, or even the stuff where he said, we went, and nobody picked up on it. He said, like, we in 2011, I was with a senator, and we were talking about the fact that we had a craft, and we'd gotten inside the craft. There's a thing on your it's on your shoulder now. It's throwing me off.
Here it is.
It's down my shirt.
No, it's.
Stop. What did I get off?
Yeah.
Probably.
Now, the advantage of having 50 years is you pick up on these little clues. So he said in 2011, James Lakatsky says, I was with a senator, and we were talking about the fact that we'd got a craft and we'd been inside the craft. And then, of course, the people who were interviewing said, what, you're inside the craft? Like, how do you get in there? And then he said, I can't. He said, what was inside the craft? He said, I can't talk about it. I got to get that approved, and then I could release it. But what they didn't pick up is the fact that he was with a senator. So the whole story is the government is covering up, the government doesn't know what to do, the Senate is trying to get this stuff, and stuff is like, no. If there's a senator in the room and he's telling him we've been inside the craft, that guy's been read in. And nobody picked up on the fact that there was a senator in the room. And so you pick up these little clues that, they have it. And so when they asked him about being inside the craft, the other thing he said, which I picked up that probably nobody else picked up, is they were all they wanted to know is what's inside the craft. And he said, I can't. I got to get that approved and release that at a later date or whatever. And then they were asking another question. And in the background, he says, if you knew the answer to that, everything else would seem primitive. And that's the whole thing. It's like this whole idea, we got to figure it out. We're flying these crafts around, and here's this guy saying that they managed to get into one craft, almost like they can't get into crafts. The one they managed to get into, and that if you knew what was going on inside the craft, your whole world would sort of blow up. It would be like nothing would make any sense. And that's when you get this thing is bigger inside the craft, or the guy from from Japan told me the story where he's with the alien, and then the alien puts his hand out like this, and the book comes out of the wall. Or Susie Hansen telling about the fact that she's in the craft, and they said, we're going to make it bigger, and she's going, what? And the walls start to move, and it gets bigger and bigger, and she said the craft was so big she couldn't see where the wall was anymore down the craft. So we're getting there. I think we're getting there in terms of understanding this thing, but it's not what people think it is. It's this really weird paranormal stuff. And that's where you've got to get the idea of bringing in all the other paranormal phenomena and connecting it, which Ray Hernandez did, which I did, but which a lot of people, even, I don't know if you know, like a lot of the major people who do UFO documentaries will not put experiences in the documentary because it's still taboo. We just don't want to do this. We're doing science. We're doing hard stuff. That's anecdotal. That's just subjective or whatever. And in the end, it's all subjective. It's all in your head. It's the whole idea. There is no green. There is no red. That's something that happens inside your head. And this idea that when you get people who have near-death experiences or out-of-body experiences, they'll say it was more real than the real world, which means that may be the real world and this is the dream, and they'll come back and say that. Or the coma people who say this was not a dream, this was not a hallucination, this actually happened to me. And they're saying I'm gone for 100,000 years or 50 years or 80 years and stuff like that. And if those people are telling the truth, which they are, we got a bunch of stuff wrong. And that's what you got to assume. You got to take that sort of humble position, which I sort of learned when I did the psychedelics, when I was under, when they were telling me, you haven't got a clue. You think you know what's going on, buddy. You haven't got a clue what's going on. And they told me over and over again. And so I've moved to that position of saying, almost like Jim Semivan, there does not appear to be any there. We have no idea. I'm never going to figure out what this thing's about. And it just gets more complex and more complex. And it almost gives you like the grandeur of the universe. That the universe becomes more magnificent, almost this expression that it's not only more magnificent than you can think, it's more magnificent than you can even imagine, this idea that it's just unbelievable. But in the end, it would look like to me that it's all going to be based on some sort of consciousness thing, that the basic thing that we believe in, materialism, is basically wrong. And then you get these weird, there's a book that I'm going to release, it's finished, but I'm going to release, is this whole idea that Seth talks about the fact that he calls them passion plays. So it's the idea, all the world's a stage, but a bunch of people all come in and play a major role, like this thing with ambulances and near-death experiences, and people all agree to come in, or the UFO thing, everybody comes in, and in that I point out this thing where you see these weird things and you say, is this synchronicity or is not? The biggest thing that runs the world today is the idea of materialism. Ingo Swann gave a lecture one time, and I just was shocked when I saw it. He said, you know where materialism comes from? You know where the idea of materialism comes from? He said it comes from the Communist Manifesto, 1848, Karl Marx. That's where the idea started. And the idea that there's no God, it's the opiate of the people, and it's just materialism and stuff like that. You know what else started in 1848? Spiritualism. The Fox sisters. That's when the whole spiritual movement started in 1848. And the quick thing is, what's the chances that the one opposite, the spiritualism versus materialism, both happened in exactly the same year? It was almost like everybody came in to play this test, to play this game. You be the materialist, I'll be the spiritualist, and we'll have this battle and we'll discuss this, and the consciousness will rise out and everybody will figure out what's going on. The other one that I had, and people say, no, it's just coincidence. The other one that I had was, the guy who invented LSD always believed it was given to him, because he did 25,000 tests of drugs. It was the only test he ever ran twice, and it was 5 years later. And he said, I should rerun that LSD 25 thing again. And he did it again, and then he somehow got it on his finger, and then he got it. So that was developed the same year that was developed. We just developed the nuclear chain reaction, which led to the atomic bomb within months, the two together. And you're going like, is this coincidence, or is this people coming in and making a play? You play this part, I play this part, and it's kind of weird. The world's completely different than it is, and that's what makes it hard to talk to people on the street, because it's so deep. It's such a steep learning curve. People think it's just UFOs, and once you realize all these other things, you realize you'd sit there talk to a person for 3 weeks to explain how all this stuff and how it works. They just think it's simple, like UFOs and aliens and stuff like that. They don't realize there's all these other components, which is what they're giving us indirectly through these experiencers. And if you listen to the experiencers, who are the people who are interacting with the intelligence, then you start to realize it's more complex and more complex, and it's I call it the Super Bowl. It's the ultimate game, but you got to play the game together. You got to sort of work together to get the answer, and we're sort of getting there. When I had the consciousness download, there was nobody working on consciousness, nobody. And Jill Bolte Taylor, who I mentioned before, Jill Bolte Taylor mentioned, and I knew this, that at the time when she had it, if you were a professor and you talked about it, you'd lose your job. If you talked about consciousness, forget about UFOs, consciousness. It was a taboo subject. You were not allowed to talk about it. And then you see, John Mack getting brought up for talking about abduction and stuff like that. And you have this very hardcore thing where you don't want to be a guy that went to MIT and paid $50,000 a year for tuition, and then someone comes and says, all the stuff you learned, it's all garbage. It's not, you're going to fight back. You're going to say, no, I can build cell phones or whatever. And what I always point out about that, the argument, oh, we can build cell phones, therefore we're right, is when before 1492, when we believed the sun went around the earth and the world was flat and everything was solid and we're not moving in space, the world's not spinning and all this kind of stuff, we would build cathedrals that had 200-foot ceilings with no posts in between. And we built the printing press, and we did a lot of technological stuff. And you say, well, because they built these cathedrals or they built the pyramids that we still can't build, because they did that, does that mean they were right about the world being flat? No, the two are not really linked. That technology is not linked to your ability to understand how the world works. That we're gradually unraveling this thing, and it's like a game. There's no winners or losers. It's everybody's in here, and it's this idea that we're all playing this game, and gradually we learn more, and then next time we come back, we may come back in a past life, or back then, to solve something there, or just to experience it, which is what you hear with the reincarnation stuff, that it's really got nothing to do with except for experience, that you're learning stuff, and because when you go back on the other side, it's potential that you know everything, and that you come in and we play these little games, which makes you see the world completely different. If you suddenly realize that everybody that you're talking to may be connected, that you may have agreed to this, you may have set this whole thing up, and then you see things completely differently than people on the street. So people on the street are in their lives, living lives of quiet desperation, just paying bills and stuff. But that's where they are, and that's, maybe next time I'll come back and just do that, have an easy time, and do that.
Sometimes that sounds much better.
Yeah, although it was frustrating. I know when I was frustrating when I was doing that, because I pulled out for 10 years and was doing all that, trying to pay the bills and stuff like that, and it's always that you're always struggling with problems. It's to put it in perspective of the fact that you may have chose these problems, and then that's when it flips everything around, when you say,
and that's something you run into people that have all these problems, and you try to, it's hard to tell them that you may be able to solve your own problems because you are the one who created your own problems, and you planned this, and you did this for a purpose, and they look at you like you're a horrible person saying that. Right. Like, no, it's kind of the way it is, and granted, there are some problems that are way out of your control. Yeah. But are they?
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's where you get experiencers will get like abductees, because you get whatever percentage think it's a horrible experience or whatever, and then when you say this whole thing about manifesting what happens around you, then are you accusing me of this, and it's sort of like you're attacking them, and yet when you look at it, I mean, the situation is, are you a random victim, or this is Michael Newton right? And Michael Newton had 7,000 clients who all basically said the same thing, that you plan all this sort of stuff, and then you get all sorts of other people who will say there's nothing random at all. In fact, I was listening to this a remote viewer this morning, and he talked about this fact that if you smash your thumb with a hammer, he maintains that was maintained, that you planned that everything's happening for a reason, that really nothing's happening by accident, that this whole thing's going along. And I guess that's our game. You just do the best you can, you put it out there, and that's what I've done, is I've tried to put everything out. I've tried not to keep anything secret, and put it out there, and the people, almost like whoever has ears to hear will hear. And the people who are listening will listen, and if they don't, well, then it wasn't intended for them.